Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tony McClellan Show. Another week and another fabulous guest. I hope you're all doing really, really well on this Monday. So if you are joining us, then do just pop your name in the comments. Tell me where you are joining us from. Get those questions ready. I've got another fabulous guest every week. They are fabulous, but this one is absolutely great. And we have the wonderful Siobhan Lavelle. So welcome, Siobhan. How are you?
I'm good, Tony. Better for an amazing introduction. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say nice things. Appreciate it.
No problem. And all is very deserving. So today we are going to be talking about change. You know that magic word that's on everybody's lips, but no one is really doing any of it, Siobhan.
Yeah. It's a great label, isn't it? But we're going to get under the skin of it, I think.
Absolutely. And we've only got 30 minutes to do that. But I can say that you're looking fabulous. You're all coordination is everything, you know.
On brand. I redecorated, especially for you, Tony.
And yes, it is on brand because everything's communicating with each other, isn't it? So, so there you go. So, do you want to introduce yourself, Siobhan, and just tell us what it is that you're doing around? Because I know that you do lots of work around marketing. You started off in marketing, didn't you? And now you still do marketing, but you incorporate communicating change through that, don't you? Yeah,
I do. So I do some quite different things, which is great because that makes my life really interesting. So I'm a marketing consultant. I've worked in marketing, PR and comms for the best part of 30 years now. And one of the areas that I specialize in is issues management, reputation management and change communication. So that's been a big part of my career, kind of helping organizations and leaders especially to communicate when things are hard, when they're going through change, and when they're maybe having a few challenges with getting their messages right.
Because I know that we've called it change communication, but actually sometimes it's about crisis as well, isn't it? And I mean, I've done some work around quick coincidence. I do lots of work around change as well. And even I sometimes need somebody that's going to help with this piece of it, you know, this communication, because it is a very specialist piece. And I don't think that people really kind of appreciate the impact and the damage to reputation that it can cause. So we're going to be talking all things change over the next 30 minutes. And let's just welcome a few people first. So we've got Salima here from Florida. Thank you for joining us. We've got Miranda, thank you for joining us. Tell us where you are joining us from and get your questions ready for Siobhan shortly. So we've got somebody from, it's Jenny from London. I can see Jenny Donaldson. Thank you for joining us, Jenny from London. We have Melody from Massachusetts. Thank you, Melody, for always being here, always showing up. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you. We've got Lamin from West Africa. So Miranda is, Dallas, Texas. No, not a Cowboy fan. Thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate that, Miranda. And we've also got Stella here from London. Thank you for joining. We've got a few more people that I can see are on the feed, but maybe feeling a little bit shy, Siobhan. So let's see if we can bring out some of that shyness. But we have got Steve as well from Minnesota. and Consaseo as well from Boston. So we've got a few people there. Apologies if I've forgotten you, but let's get into this conversation. You know, especially over the last few years, it's almost as if change is only just happening over the last few years, because, you know, when I kind of think about everything globally, I used to think about everything that happened with the pandemic. I used to think of it as a global change project. You know, when we were thinking about the pandemic and COVID, all the different departments, I used to kind of look at it as all the different countries were like different departments. We're all going through it at the same time. And so it was really interesting seeing the different responses to the different leaders, how they were dealing with things, how they were getting results. So for me, just watching that change globally over the last few years, I've kind of thought about it. What does that look like in an organization? I don't know, but change seems to be a thing. All of a sudden, it's in fashion as well. Everybody's talking about it. What are your thoughts initially, Siobhan?
That's so interesting that change is like the thing to do at the moment. And I think change has always been here, but it's the way we do it now, hopefully, is a little different and a lot better than how we used to. When I started working in change comms, there were leaders who very much thought that they would drive the communication, they would share the information, and people would listen and act and do what they were told almost. Whereas now, change is much more a conversation, which is absolutely as it should be. It should be a dialogue. It should be listening, sharing information, asking and answering questions, and getting people involved to kind of drive the future of whatever is going forward. I mean, some change has to take a particular route, and the outcomes are going to be inevitable. If you're a big organization and you've got to make changes for a financial reason, then that's tough, but that's one way that things have got to go. But often operational change or organizational change can actually be a really great way to collaborate with your stakeholders, whether that's staff or external audiences. So doing it together is a really good way way forward.
Let's start from the beginning. So with change very much on the agenda at the moment, I think that there is something around organizations feeling that they have to. And, that yes, there will be some elements, and really understanding what it is that you need to change. How do you need to make that adjustment? And I think that sometimes where we're in a space where we're going through so much change, people are feeling as if we've got to change this, even if it's working okay. So I always say that change is as good as the leader, because we have to make sure that it's not driven by power and ego. And anytime I've been in these situations, I've always looked for allies on the ground, people that can share in this message and support how that's kind of rolled out. So I don't know if you've got any more thoughts on that, and we'll welcome a few other people as well, Siobhan.
Yeah. Do you remember you mentioned the pandemic, and the one of the buzzwords was pivot. We have to pivot. We have to change rapidly to adjust to what's going on around us. And so it has become more normal, which is great. But actually, you've got to have a goal. If you're going through change, and if you're putting an organization and your teams and your customers or clients or whoever's important to your organization, if you're going through change, you've got to know what your goals are. And that does come back to having good leadership. And what I found, Tony, is that sometimes leadership teams agree that change has to happen, and it can be for very good reasons, it can be for really powerful reasons, it can be for financial or legal reasons. But often those people are not necessarily natural communicators. They might have a legal background, or they might be accountants, or they might have really strong operational backgrounds which have got them to the top of their organizations. Maybe they're family-run firms that have grown and they've kind of covered everything. But then all of a sudden they find themselves having to face a major change, implement a major change, and talk about it to people.
And that's where they need to bring in professionals that do this professionally, like, for example, the work that you do around damage reputation, because once it goes out, it's gone, and there's so much to think about, and I don't think that there's enough thought that goes into that yet. So we'll probably share a few examples as well, but let's say hi to a few other people that have joined us as well. We've got Marcia over in the US. Thank you for joining us, Marcia. We've got Mike Duff. Thank you, Mike from Dorset. Welcome. We've got Carol Edmondson from the UK. Thank you for joining us. We've got Alexandra, and who else? We've got Dan. We've got David from Southampton, and we have Dan from LinkedIn. Always in the comments, making trouble. Dan is he's just making sure that we're keeping on our toes. So where are we again as well? Right, okay. So we've got everyone there. So let's just think about change for the sake of change. You know, we've got some. Let's just do it this way. We've got some leaders that are able to make decisions, and because they're able to make decisions, want to make decisions about everything, even when it's not needed.
Yeah.
That's your cue. That's your cue, Siobhan.
Well, goals are really important, but I think the other thing to really factor in when you're looking at change for an organization is you've got to understand the impact emotionally on the people that are going to go through the change. Because if you're making change for change's sake, then that might not end well when you're trying to bring employees or external stakeholders on board with what you're doing.
But that's how much of that is about power and ego, though, because you know, I've seen people that have made these changes and these decisions without even thinking about, you know, the feelings of others. I'm in charge, do as I say, won't be contested. You can't, you know, change their mind. They won't listen to anything. This is how it's going to go. And that's when it's really very, very damaging. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember where if you're a leader and you decide to change something within your business, you are the first one to know what that change is going to be. So you think it through, you know what the impact it's going to have on your organization is likely to be, and you understand what change you're looking to see. So everyone else in the organization is going to be a step behind you. It's going to take them a little bit of time to catch up with your thinking on what you're trying to achieve within your business, and bringing them on board, bringing them on the journey with you will only work if you can communicate it well, and if you listen and engage and involve people.
And the thing about it is as well, I'm going to expand it out a little bit more because you know, the leader may have some insight, but actually it's about the leadership team coming together and working with that leader as well. So, you know, it could be driven by others and their insights and their professional spaces or the current climate or whatever's going on. So whilst the leader may be the one that makes that overall decision, you know, it can actually be driven by some other elements as well, you know, or a change in service. So you know, that's kind of like another bit that we need to think about. And I think that we look at, when we think about change, we think about this kind of, you know, I do hand signals. We think about the pyramid, don't we? And this leader at the top. But actually, we want to kind of flatten the top out a little bit so that it's more, you know, co-production, co-creation, these kind of models. And I found that when I think about it in that kind of sense, and when I engage people in that kind of sense, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
It's so much easier. They feel empowered, they're engaged, there's ownership. Over to you.
Yeah, completely. And you know, I think some of the people who have it hardest during change are those managers, the people in the middle, because they're usually the ones that are told what the change is going to be. Whether they like it or not, they are part of driving the change, and they've often then got to manage the people that are going to be on the front line of whatever the change is going to be, whether it's something operational or something kind of that affects how you work together. And those managers often are in a really difficult position because they might not support the change, but they can't necessarily let that show to their team.
And that's even more reason why they need to be part of the process.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I talk about a lot is the RACI model. You know, who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed. And quite often I see it all getting confused. You know, people that should be informed are the ones that are consulted and become the decision makers. And it's all a bit, and the decision maker is not making a decision because they want to keep consulting and a decision is never reached out. And it all just gets, have you seen it just getting messy?
A big old mess, yeah. And you know, one of the things that I think works really well in that situation, whether you see it coming or whether you're in it and you've got to unravel something, is to do some proper planning with decent timelines of what you want to happen by when. Because very often people get very excited about change, or they go the other way and run away from it. So you get some quite extreme reactions. But if you set a timetable out for what you want to happen by when, and then if you share that with people, at least everybody knows what's going on, and they kind of have their own ways of managing their expectations, even if it's just to say, we're doing this change, this is the first bit of information you're going to have about it, we'll update you again next week. And then you do that, you update people the following week.
Still, Siobhan, we're going through some change. This is what we're thinking and why we're thinking it, and we'd love for you to be involved.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Maybe just because automatically you get people's backup, don't you? If you don't involve them, like we were talking about at the very early stage, you have to make them feel empowered. Quite often as leaders, we have no clue of what it looks like on the ground as well. So what are the things we need to consider? How can you help? And I find that if you get these people involved, it really, really is. But let's keep this conversation going. Let's bring a few more people in. We've got Modu, who's here from Gambia. Thank you. We've got Sarah, who is from Ohio in the US. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. And someone's saying good to be back. I'm not sure who that is, but I will identify very, very soon. So we've got Monigo, who is there. Thank you so much. And Yangbo, thank you so much as well for joining us. So we've got a few people joining us. Get those questions ready. We've only got Siobhan here for a very short time. So if you have a specific question around change in organization, how to communicate it, then this is the person that you need to really be contacting as well. So yeah. When I think about change, you know, sometimes it's really for good reason. It's really evident. And it really does come back down to that individual that is the decision maker, that is leading it, and their own self-awareness in some ways. So there's two different aspects. And when I think about change, I think about it in two different ways. One is the individual person. And one is the organization. And I call the organizational culture the character of that, you know, that's the character of that organization. And I don't think that people really kind of understand enough about behaviors and that type of thing to really get to grips with change. But it's really, for me, very much about, you know, the shine model, with people really understanding that the three different layers of, you know, of change. So if anyone wants to know more about change, check out Edgar and Peter Shine's Shine model. That will tell you as much as you need to know. But there's different elements. Harvard Business School, they speak about different elements, and that is transformational change, the bigger change, and then you've got the adaptive change, which is the smaller pieces. Do you want to just talk us through a couple of those models and what they might be like for communication?
Maybe I can give you some examples. So in terms of major organizational change, some of the things I've been involved with have been mergers, big redundancy programs, big reorganizations, all of that kind of really big, important stuff. And actually, when people go through that, it's people, you'll have heard about the Kubler-Ross change curve. People can respond to that sort of change the same way that we respond to grief. Some people now disagree with this as a model, but I've seen this in action, and I firmly believe that we do go through this kind of emotional response where, first of all, we are angry, we reject the fact that this change is happening, and we're very kind of annoyed and cross, and take it out maybe on the leaders that are involved with the driving.
It's
we're suddenly losing. Yeah, absolutely. Then people then move into denial. People can often feel very down and, personally quite kind of devastated by the change that's happening, and really hit rock bottom. From that point, hopefully, as long as you're bringing people along and they're understanding what's changing and they're recognizing the need for change and they feel like they're being listened to and involved and heard and able to collaborate, then people start to think, okay, well, yeah, maybe I'll just stick this out and see what's going to happen. They start to engage, start to understand a little bit more about what's happening. And eventually we move into acceptance, where people think, yeah, this is happening, or this has happened, this is the new reality, I'm going to move on. And I think the key to communicating through that is you've got to establish trust. You've got to be honest. You've got to be open. Sometimes big change like that is driven by legal or financial reasons, and you can't necessarily share all the details, but you can be honest about that, and you can say that's subject to some legal discussion at the moment. I can't answer your question, but as soon as I can answer it, I will come back to you and let you know. So kind of establishing that respect for people. And the other thing I think is really important with change is that we don't know where people are at. The day that they receive the big news about this change, whether it's big organizational change or even incremental change that's affecting their own roles, we don't know whether they've had a good day so far that day or whether they've had a bad day. Maybe they had an argument with their partner. Maybe they've just taken out a mortgage, and so they're really worried that there will be a change in their role that might affect them financially. We don't know what other people bring to the table, and I think that's where leaders struggle a lot, because you can't have a one size fits all communication in that circumstance. You've got to have that empathy and that ability to kind of understand that actually people are going through a lot in our lives, and we don't know what is making somebody react on that particular day to the news that they've been given.
And I think that that's all key, and that's why one of the reasons why I'm just so passionate about compassion and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because I use those two areas, by introducing them into organizations to embed change. So, you know, when they're going through change and it's like really difficult, look, you've got two areas that you need to introduce to make it smoother and more sustainable and will future-proof your business. So for me, that's really important. That's where the compassion piece comes in. When I talk about compassion, I mean, we've got Deloitte talks about six C's of inclusive leadership. And I don't need to, you can go and look that up. I don't need to get into what they are. But I add in, when we're talking about compassion, I add in two, and they are community and communication. They are real, you know, because without community, you have nothing. And without communication, you have nothing. And one of the areas that really kind of is overlooked, Siobhan, the importance of really thinking through this communication, the timing of it is absolutely key. And people don't really think about timing as much as they could or should. And I'll give you a real brief example. I was catapulted into an organization once to do this piece of work. We had an inspection coming, you know, regulation visit. It was absolutely massive. And, you know, I was there working on it for 6 months and the date was coming. We were only 3 weeks away. But what I was doing was I was recruiting the person that's going to take this lead and take this organization to the next level, the next chief exec. So it was really important that because we only had 2 weeks left, that we didn't let them know about this new person we just recruited yet. And this chair of the board just sent this email out to everybody saying, and I just thought, oh my gosh, that's disastrous. I've got 2 weeks to go. They actually thought that by sharing that information, it would help to chivvy them along. I said, by sharing that information, there is absolutely no reason for anyone to listen to anything I've got to say. You know, we've got 2 weeks to get this on board. And you know what? I might as well leave now because it's going to be like rolling people uphill.
Oh, what a shame.
What I was trying to make was that let's get communication right, and timing is key. You know, at that point. As it happened, we got a great inspection. We got an outstanding inspection, and it was good on a couple of other parts. But it's just a real example of where it can go wrong.
Yeah. And you know, one thing you've highlighted there really, really well is how important it is to, if you're leading change, you're part of a team, you've got to work together. Because if you have somebody that goes a bit rogue and does something that they shouldn't be doing, then every best laid plan can completely fall apart. So, you know, you've got to work together.
I felt the blood running out of my body when I saw that email. I just thought, oh my God, so now I've got to rectify this and kind of, you know, because so that was good. So let's just bring in a couple of others as well. We've got Tony Cross. Thank you for joining us. I'm with you, Tony Cross. Thank you. We've got Marcia, who's, my mum says this regularly, you don't know what people are going through. Absolutely. And Siobhan's just kind of highlighted this whole change cycle. It is part of a process. And if you're not sure about that process, I say to people, think about what we went through with the pandemic. where you had all the messaging, do we trust in the leadership? Do we trust in our government, the messages that they were bringing through? There was some resistance. Some people wanted consultation, but even when lives were at risk, there were still some people that were resisting. So, if you use that as an example of the process of change, and so when we were going through that, I was keenly watching the movement and the behaviors to kind of test some of my original theories. So that's really interesting.
The flip side to that, Tony, as well, is that if you're leading change, it can be incredibly lonely to be the leader of change, and sometimes you feel the weight of your decisions on your shoulders, and that can be a really tough position to be in, especially if you're making difficult decisions or decisions that are going to have a really big impact on a lot of people. And again, that's why you as a critical friend for businesses, me and what I do, just having someone to talk to sometimes, if you're the driver of something big, is really important. Just having somebody to articulate the options with, and get a kind of an objective perspective can be.
But the other side of it as well. Absolutely, Siobhan. And the other side of it as well is because you've got internal communication, you've got external communication. That's where the reputation piece that you do comes into it. And one of the things that I say to leaders is, look, if you don't know, you don't know. But just say you don't know. You don't have to make it up. You don't have to fill the gap. But what is important is commitment to consistent communication. We will update you. Normally it starts off really well and then it peters out.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my goodness, you're spot on. But you're right. I think it's fine to say that you don't know. I think that's a good thing. I think that's honest and it's open, and people will trust you then far better than to wing it or to make something up or to just say something and keep your fingers crossed and hope that that's going to come to be true, because people will not trust you next time. And it's far better to be honest. And this is humans talking to humans, people working with people, and we sometimes don't know everything, and it's refreshing to be honest, and it's the right thing to do.
Now you've mentioned the word honesty. Let's talk about how honest you need to be when it comes to duty of candor, because that is a big piece, especially in the world that I'm in. What to communicate. Something's happened. What do you communicate? You do have a duty to communicate something, but you can't betray the trust or the confidentiality of the actual situation. And there was a time where I can remember that there was an incident where a staff member and a student there was an altercation, and unfortunately, we had to move the staff member into a different building, into a different site. But what it meant was moving that staff member into a different site was that they were no longer around for everybody else that needs them on the original site. And so the parents wanted to know, well, actually, what's happened to so-and-so? So that's where duty of candor comes in. It's like you've got to tell them something, but you can't tell them everything.
Yeah.
And you've got to find the balance. And that is where I would be reaching out to someone like you, Siobhan, to say, help me with this communication, because we obviously need to get it out there somewhere. So can you kind of, using that example, can you kind of give some pointers around for anyone that's listening here at the moment?
So yeah, absolutely. Your business.
First of all, can you explain duty of candor, what that actually is as well, in the context of what we're talking about?
So the way I understand that, you've got to be truthful and honest, and it is the responsibility of good business leaders, good organizations, to be truthful and honest. But you do also, as you've just quite rightly said, have to respect confidentiality. There are some things that you can't and shouldn't share. So the way I kind of approach it, every situation is unique without a doubt. But I always think of the principle of just enough information, just in time. Because what happens if you don't update people, if you're not honest with people, is they will make up their version of events. And then you've got rumor mills flowing, you've got social media going crazy, you've got all sorts of other problems that you then might have to look at and consider dealing with. But if you give just the right amount of information, not betraying any trusts or confidences or sharing anything that's confidential, just before people start to get over committed to their version of events, which might not be true, then you can start to talk consistently about what's happened or what is about to happen or whatever the circumstances might be. And you are establishing a direct channel of information from you, from your business, from your position as leader to the people that need to have it. And then you stick to it and you say, if there's further updates, we will share them if that's appropriate.
Absolutely.
That's really
and again,
important
it goes back to where I mentioned about the racy model, doesn't it, Siobhan, in terms of who is the decision maker, who's accountable, because that's where it gets a bit messy. You've got different people trying to make decisions. You've got an ultimate decision maker, too much involvement. Who needs to know? And sometimes it's share on a need to know basis. Who need to know and what do they need to know? And I don't think, I mean, my background in criminal justice has always been around that on a need to know basis. So I'm always thinking about that. What are your thoughts around who needs to know and what they need to know?
Yeah. Well, sometimes you need to talk to different audiences in different ways. So if you've got people with particular areas of responsibility that need more factual information, then you have to account for that and you have to make sure that they know and understand the boundaries of confidentiality. But one of the good measures that I have is if somebody's going to be talking to whatever's going on around the dinner table with their family that evening, what do you want them to be saying? So you need to make sure that your messages are reaching the right people who are going to be hopefully ambassadors for you and for what you're doing in a way that they can remember them, so that when their partner or family member or friend says, oh, I heard that this happened in your company, your organization, your team, they can answer it honestly and truthfully. And if there is a boundary, a line that information can't be shared beyond, they say, I don't know anything more than that, but I've heard that this is what's happened and this is what's been done to deal with it. So have that dinner table test in mind.
And what I would say as well is this is where compassion and DEIB comes in as well, because if you use those compassionate approaches and diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging approaches, you're going to make sure that you're communicating in a way that people understand as well. Remove some of the jargon, introduce some layman terms. Is there an online intranet communication? Is there a written format? Just really thinking about the different types. And also when we go, so that's internal. And then when we go external, we've got the stakeholders as well. So engaging all the stakeholders, everyone's going to have a different view. But if you engage them and come together, then it's so much easier to work together. I feel, so anything Absolutely. That you want to say on that, Siobhan?
I think you mentioned using jargon, and you've got to make sure that your messages and what you're saying is clear and easy to understand, because if people don't understand what you're saying, they won't remember what you're saying, and then they can't pass on what you're saying. So if you're sharing messages that you want people to feel comfortable sharing with others, then you've got to help them understand, remember, and articulate themselves. And so, simplicity is really key. And I think, sometimes a lot of what I do is kind of interpreting for business leaders. They'll come up with something very complex that they want to communicate, and I will strip it back over and over and over again until we get to the simplest little hub of what they're really trying to say. And that's what we go with. Because that gets the message across. Yeah, keep it simple. It sounds really obvious, and actually simple writing, simple language can be really hard, but it's well worth it, because you bring people on board and then they understand what you're trying to do and understand what you're trying to say, and that's essential.
And sometimes if you bring the right people on board, they might say, well, actually, you don't need to do all that.
Yeah, because people have brilliant ideas, and if you don't give them the chance to share them, and if they don't understand what you're trying to do, they're not going to share their ideas. So
Absolutely. So we've got Lamin saying about community and communication, which is really what you're reinforcing as well. It's all about the people and that communication. It can make an organization or it can break an organization too. So we've got Marcia, who's saying, I had a leader who made changes because she made me and my manager were too close. Funny, I ended up being her assistant for 3 years. That is really interesting in itself. Because I think that, like, it goes back to what we were saying earlier on, that it's only as good as the leader. And if the leader is in a place of they don't know about their own self-awareness, then that's interesting in itself. So instead of saying, remember, if you say nothing to those you think do not need to know, then they will fill in the gaps with incorrect info depending on their emotional attachment, impact, or influence. Even if they do not need to know everything, they need to be told something. I think everybody would be told something. It's just about the level of detail that's required. And the way that I see it is that if you've got leaders of certain departments or whatever, they will know how to deal with it best. And I was very fortunate that in my earlier career, I had some really great leaders that just left me to it. This is where we need to get to, Tony, and how I've done it. They weren't concerned, you know, and I think that we need a little bit more leadership like that, where we give them a little bit more, you know, where we empower. We use our power to empower others, and we ask questions and all of those things that we need to do in terms of compassion. So the 30 minutes has kind of come and gone really, really quickly, Siobhan. So do you want to kind of just wrap up if there's 2 or 3 key things that they really need to do? I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated, but a couple of things I would throw out there are things that are, you know, if you start communication, keep it up. Even if there's not lots to report, just say, we're just keeping in touch, nothing much to report at the moment, but we wanted to just keep you informed. People will appreciate that so much. And the timing is key. Over to you, Siobhan.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Tony. I would say plan your change and plan the communication that you need to do to make your change a success. So what are your goals? What do you want your teams, the people that are going to be impacted, to do? And then think about, as you say, timing. Make sure you're consistent with your messaging, that you keep communicating, but listen as well. Listen and engage and collaborate with the people who are going to be impacted by this, because people do have brilliant ideas. People will be more likely to buy into the change if they understand why it's happening, and they will have better trust, respect, and, you know, a kind of hopefully a more positive feeling about the change if they feel a part of it, if they feel a little bit of ownership of it, even if they can't drive the bigger picture. But if they know that they are being listened to and they are being valued, then that can make a huge difference. And, you know, remember that dinner table test. Whatever you're communicating, it's no good if people can't recall it and articulate it themselves. How are they going to tell their partner, an important person in their life, what's going on? Think about how you can help them do that, because then they can become really good ambassadors for you, for your business, and for what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And, you know, just to round off, I think I will just mention, I do have a change model that's based on 5 different pillars. And this is about individual leadership change. And those pillars are: understand the behavior, you know, that this person is demonstrating. Understand how they take on board learning, the environmental factors and how that has an impact on some of what Stella was saying about the emotional piece. Yeah. Think about the network, who's around them, who is influencing, and also, you know, their own self-awareness. So these are the things. Some of it might come out in supervision, but really thinking about those aspects as well when you're talking about change, you know, and when we've heard of people being, you know, made redundant, we've heard of these telephone calls, or they're on a Skype call or something. Well, actually, that's when it needs to be face to face, you know. So think about those 5 different pieces, and that will help you as well. But really, when we're driving change and communicating change, the first place to stop is ourselves. Are we in the right place to deliver this? And if not, delegate it out, empower others, call in professionals. You know, that is because that is a place where I see so much going wrong. And when I've gone in, and you have to be very sensitive to what you can feed back to that leader, because they might take it wrong. And, you know, so really think about who it is. It doesn't have to be the leader. It can be other people that are representative. If it's think about who's the right person for the right message. And Siobhan, there was so much in there that I just want to say thank you. We talked about the RACI model. So that's who's responsible, accountable, informed, consulted. We mentioned SHINE and that organizational model there. We mentioned adaptive and transformational change. You've given some really great points about communication. And I just want to kind of wrap it up by just saying that everybody wants change, but no one wants to change. Because we're all looking at everybody else saying that you need to do the change in Siobhan, you need to change, Tom needs to change, Susan needs to change. But we're not looking at ourselves at what we need to change. But we need to remember that it starts with us. And if you're in an organisation, we need to think about where we're at in that change journey. Would you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on that, Siobhan?
I think you're absolutely right. I think, we're never working in isolation. We're always part of a community, and especially if we're part of an organisation or a business or a company. And I think we have to, especially if we're leading change, make sure that we understand and have empathy for ourselves and for the people around us, because it can be really hard. But that just because it's hard doesn't mean we can't do our best to communicate it and manage it as best as we possibly can.
Absolutely. And strategy and planning and all of these things, embedding those things for sustainability, the 4 Ps. We've got purpose, which we mentioned earlier on. What are we trying to do? Why we're trying to do it? How will it benefit us, the organisation, and you? People, how are we leading the people? The planet, what are we doing about sustainability? Because that is going to make your business sustainable and profit or performance as well. So that's part of being a compassionate business. And I just want to say thank you so much, Siobhan, for sharing your insights with all of us. Do feel free to reach out to Siobhan, and I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions you have around that. We have Lamin, who is saying, you said it all, DEIB is driven concept to culturally deeply rooted in companies. It absolutely should be embedded there. The leaders represent the soul of the company, and without communication, people don't feel valued. And we've got Kondakar, thank you for joining, no problem. And we've got Lamin as well. So thank you so much. Lamin, Tony, Dan, who's saying that he's coming to us from the London dungeon, always in there making trouble all the time. We've got
Hope you can get out all right, Dan.
Who's saying that change is a constant. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Miranda, Lamin, Stella, Stephen, Consejo, Mike, Carol, Alexandra, David, Dan, Moniho, Tony again, and so many others. You're all there in the feed. Thank you so much for joining. And Siobhan, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And hopefully you'll come back and we'll talk about change a little bit more.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me today, Tony. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll be here next week, same time, with another fabulous guest. So bye for now. Thank you for spending time with me and my guest today on Critical Reflections with Your Critical Friend. Today, you got just a very, very small sprinkling of Tony's fairy dust. But if you'd like more, then do reach out for speaking or hosting. It's tonymcclellan.com. For social impact, social justice, or social mobility, check out our work at firstlifegroup.com. I look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, feel encouraged, be inspired, be empowered, and make a difference. Bye for now.